You came down like rain on a summer day. You humbled yourself, the king became a slave.
Hey, greetings to Faith Christian Fellowship. This is our sermon follow-up, as well as our home group discussion video. We hope this week. We're kind of playing a role reversal. This week, had a great privilege to have Pastor Kyle take the lead on the message from Sunday morning. And so as we prepared for this sermon video, we thought, well, let's just keep that role reversal going. So I get the privilege of hosting our video this time. And so I'm going to kind of play the role of host, and Kyle's going to continue to hand over some of these great thoughts on some of the questions that you guys probably have with you right now. At least we hope you do. First of all, I just want to give you an opportunity to kind of go a little further with whatever you presented here on Sunday morning. Acts chapter 5. Give us just a little bit of an overview again for those that either heard it or just could use the refresher.
Yeah. So it's a great story. It's such a cool passage, and I was excited when I realized I was going to get to do it. You know, we get this story of the apostles, and they're out preaching, and there's this buzz about them, and they're starting to make an impact, and the high priest and the Sadducees, they see this going on, and they're not happy with it, and it's causing lots of trouble. So they arrest him and they throw him in jail and say, you can't be doing this. And then in the middle of the night, this rescue mission is put forth where it says an angel of the Lord comes down and breaks them out, and which is crazy in and of itself. Like that, we just kind of read through that. Oh yeah, I've heard that story. That's nuts. And so this happens, and then the angel says, he doesn't say, get out of town. You know, like, go, this is your chance. He says, go do it again. Go do the same thing again. So it says, the morning came, and they went into the temple, and they began to teach, and they did it again. And just the faith that displays is pretty impressive, and just trying to put ourselves in the mindset of the apostles in this. And so, of course, the Sadducees get upset about that, and they go to get him, and they bring him back, and they're like, we clearly told you not to do this, right? And so they're trying to figure out what to do, and this guy comes in, and he's like, okay, and it's he's like, here's how we have to look at this, and says we can't just kill him, we can't just keep him in here. You guys got to calm down. If this is of man, if this movement is of man, if this whole thing is of man, it's going to die out. It's done it before, right? And he goes through a couple guys that had happened. And then he said, and if it's of God, which this is a big deal, if it's of God, you can't stop it anyway. Absolutely. And he says, so worst case scenario, you find yourself actually in opposition of God. And I mean, he speaks the truth. Like that's it in a nutshell.
Right. And
so it says, yeah, like they agree, yet ironically they bring him back in, beat him half to death, and tell him not to do it, and they send him off, and they go do it again. Right. They never cease. They just keep right on going and doing it. And it even says in verses 40 and 41 that they left rejoicing over the fact that they have been found worthy of that kind of dishonor for Christ's sake, right? Hey, we earned that beating, right. Kind of thing. And then they went right back to it and kept preaching the gospel. And that whole scene is just so counter culture to kind of way we look at it. And what would we do in that situation? Would we rise up against the people that are oppressing us? Would we try to all sorts of things? And we have this example of what they do. And so that's the story of it. That's the kind of a quick snapshot overview of what happens and what we're looking at this morning.
Yeah, so if you weren't with us, and there's a little bit of an overview. If you were with us, it's a refresher. It is a great story. I love Kyle's use of that idea of countercultural. And as we were talking about glorious mystery, it's going to be pretty important that countercultural is a framework that goes over this. And certainly chapter 5 gives a great picture of that counterculture. And he referenced that the man, I believe Gamaliel, at the end of chapter 5, poses this contrast, which is really funny. We don't know him to be a believer at all. In fact, an opponent of the way, the faith. He's actually an opponent of them, it would seem, based on the story. But he puts out this great truth. If this is of man, it will die out. If this is of God, then we can't stop it anyway. And so that's such a great picture, and the story that surrounds that that gamble that he puts out there is really, really amazing. And as Kyle has taught through that for Sunday, we're just going to go through these questions real briefly and try and help and guide you along if that helps you. The first question that we have here is we often feel the tension between pleasing God and pleasing men. I don't think there's any question that all of us face that dilemma, that the world has one expectation but God has another. What usually goes into making that decision? What do we weigh before we take action?
Yeah, yeah. The idea there is just to kind of think through that, kind of put ourselves maybe even in the shoes of the apostles here, and then try to apply it to like what we do during the day, just our regular stuff. And yeah, there's definitely this tension that we feel. I think it varies from situation to situation. If you're with people who are believers, sometimes you feel positive peer pressure or a safeness to look at different things, and if you're in a different setting, you may feel the pressure of man to kind of do this. And so the idea is what things do we weigh when we come to that decision? And a lot of times, we look at the immediate repercussions or the immediate approval of man in the moment, and that outweighs the potential blessings of God. So we may say, okay, this is what God wants us to do, but those blessings aren't really tangible, and I don't see them in the moment, and this guy's looking at me right now, and I'm going to feel this judgmental stare, and these people aren't going to like me, and so I can deal with that later. I can worry about the blessings or whatever, and we don't think about it the way we should, and our allegiances are kind of torn.
Right.
And so I want us to kind of talk through that a little bit. What do we look at? What do we weigh when we make those decisions? Am I doing this for man, or am I doing this for God? And don't lie and say, I do everything for God, right? That's not true. So don't say that. And it's to different levels and to different degrees. But if you dig down deep enough, we all have those kind of things that we're not quite surrendering over when we weigh those two things.
Okay, that's great. I mean, I don't think any of us would say that this is not a dilemma that each of us face on a daily basis, is who am I going to please? What kingdom is my allegiance? You use that word, allegiance. What kingdom do I give my allegiance to? That is a daily, that's a moment by moment kind of question. And so hopefully your groups, you guys can get some great insight from even those in your group. What do they do? What are some of your group members? What are the things that they share about what causes them to weigh those things out, or what are the things that cause them to weigh it out? The second question is another great one. In Acts 5, the apostles find themselves in prison directly opposing religious leaders, religious authorities. That probably is not going to look, that's going to be a challenging translation for us. If you oppose me, we could have problems, but it probably doesn't look quite the same. Just kidding. What would be going through your head as you sit in jail for having done what you thought was pleasing to God? This is a really great one if you want to take this, Kyle, and play it out a little bit.
Yeah, so we usually think if I do what is pleasing to God, then I will reap a reward, or it will turn out well for me according to our definition of well, right? So if I do this right thing, then this good thing will happen, or this blessing will come, or whatever it would be. And we would never think that doing the right thing would lead us to trouble, or the right thing leading us to jail. And you could say, this is obviously, here's the religious authorities, but you could look at it, even political authorities or whatever it be. If there's a law that says you can't pray, I'm going to jail. That's kind of the
right
thing. And so there's a confusion, a tension there as well as to when we do good, when we do something that pleases God, and the result is not something that fits our context of a blessing or of good or his his kingdom being advanced, whatever it would be. We gotta work that out. And so just talk a little bit about what would be going through your minds in that, and what might have been going on in their minds, and on a much, much smaller scale, you could say, okay, so I'm at work, and the boss found out I was a Christian, and he's doesn't like that, so he's going to kind of look over me for this promotion or whatever it would be. Right. It's a very small scale kind of thing. It may not feel that way, but compared to prison, it is. We think, well, that's not fair, God. Why would me doing the right thing and standing up for truth or whatever it would be cause consequences that are not good? And start to think through that, because there's a much, much bigger picture on the other side of that.
Yeah.
That we get to as we go through here.
Yeah, that makes me think a lot of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they are confronted with sort of choosing between which kingdom, right? The kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon to imagine worshiping a false god, or are they going to stay devoted to the one true God? And I remember in Daniel where they say to Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, if it pleases the Lord, he will rescue us from this punishment. But even if he does not, we will still not bow down and worship this false god." And so there's a real example of three guys that are saying, the outcome does not determine what is right. What God says is right determines what is right. So just a powerful picture of that. Maybe that helps in the discussion conversation. Question number 3 is great. It's a very picturesque idea of what it looks like, what it might have looked like for the disciples, the apostles, to be confronted with an angel who's going to release them out, what their expressions might be. You guys can kind of discuss that and see where that leads. Those are always fun conversations to sort of put yourself in their shoes for the moment and imagine. But jumping down to question number 4, really want to kind of close with this one. This is a solid one also. Looking at the response of the apostles after they are beaten truly to the point of death. We don't really see the depth of how much they were beaten. That it really was, people would have died from what they experienced, that kind of treatment that we find in verses 40 and 41. And yet, like Kyle said earlier, the response is that they left rejoicing to be considered worthy to suffer dishonor in the name of Christ, or in the name of Christ. So, what do we aspire to in this?
Yeah.
Help us think through it.
Yeah, this is spend some time developing that a little bit, that thought. When we suffer even the most minor of persecution, which I don't even know we could call much of what we suffer persecution, right? Unless you've actually been beaten, which is not a normal thing in our country context of persecution. When we suffer even the minors, which is like that guy looked at me funny, or he doesn't want to hang out with me, or whatever it is, because I'm a believer, and we feel this sense of outrage and injustice, right, that has been done to us because of what we believe, and that goes quickly down a road that we're never intended to go down, and to view it from an angle we're never intended to view it from. So take it to an extreme here, like, right, they're being beaten within an inch of their life because they did the right thing in honoring God and preaching truth, and they leave with this attitude. My attitude would be complete anger and disdain. It left to ourselves, and our flesh would say, well, this is wrong, this is an injustice. How are we going to get them back? How are we going to fight for our rights? How are we going to do all of these things? How are we going to right this injustice that has been done to me? And there's no concern for that. There's no concern for that, because they know what Gamaliel had said earlier. This can't be stopped. It doesn't matter how many people they beat. It's not going to be stopped.
Right.
And that's the view that we need to take from it. And so the question here at the end of it is, do we aspire to this? Do we aspire to surrender ourselves so fully to God that our own freedom is secondary to God's will? And that's a whole nother level. Mm-hmm. There's a whole other level of faith and trust and surrender. And that, we have a tendency to think that the apex, or the climax of our self is our own free will, and that's what our country's about, and this and this and that, and that's a great thing, but it's a lie. Right? We're not. In theory, it's nice and it's good, but our will is not what we are put here for. Yeah. Our will is not. And are we willing? And do we aspire to surrender ourselves so fully that our own will comes secondary? Our own freedoms even come secondary. Will I lay down my freedom, whatever that looks like, for the cause of Christ? They did it gladly, right? They walk out rejoicing. Just the change in attitude of that from what I would think would be the natural response, right?
Yeah.
Rejoicing over the fact that they were counted worthy of that. Not many of us are there. I'm not there. I'm not there. And so this is a picture of faith and of surrender that we get from the apostles here. This should inspire us to chase after that. And that's a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we all celebrate the fact that we live in the freest country on earth. It's been a great privilege for us to have those things. But as Kyle was mentioning, we need to be careful, I think, of the stumbler that is. To celebrate that on one side, to be grateful for the gift that God has given us and the freedoms that we enjoy, but realize that those freedoms can actually become obstacles to a surrendering to His will. Because, like Kyle's saying, now we become entitled to that freedom and or free will, the things that we feel that we're entitled. Are we grateful for it? Of course. It has been a gift for hundreds of years that we enjoy that kind of freedom as a country and as a people. We can worship just freely in the midst of that. But we need to be very, very careful that we don't overlook the fact that could turn on us to become actually an obstacle or a barrier to surrendering our freedom, our will, to that of God's. And so a great reminder on that. And again, I just draw us back. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think I'm glad you mentioned that. We have this tendency to think so anything that takes away our freedom, and I'm not talking about the political side of things. I just mean if I'm going to go to jail for my faith, or anything that takes away our freedom on any side is against God. God wouldn't want that. Or God wouldn't want my will to be surrendered. That's not true, and that's the picture we have here, right, of that. Absolutely, God might want you to go to jail. Yeah, absolutely. It happens all over the New Testament, right? For doing the right thing, and so when we often put that on the side of, well, this can't be God's will because this will lead me to lose freedom, or me to, and I mean personal freedom, and so it can't be God's will. No, that's not the test of God's will whatsoever.
Yeah. And the sermon series that we've titled Glorious Mystery, again, I draw back to that distinction that Gamaliel makes at the end of this chapter, or near the end of the chapter, where the decision is, we're going to leave these men, although they don't, they beat them in the end, but essentially we're going to leave these men alone, because if it is of men, this will die out. And if it's of God, we can't stop it. Well, here we are 2,000 years later. So this story of their faithfulness, this story of them surrendering their will to that of God's will, no matter what the cost, no matter what the sacrifice, is why we exist here today. It's because of that. And certainly the Holy Spirit was behind their ability to surrender, as He would be in ours. None of us can do this on our own. It's only by His strength. But the apostles give us a picture. They give us a very clear picture of why do we enjoy what we enjoyed 2,000 years later? Because it was of God. It absolutely was of God. And it took faithful men to put that on display, that this was of God. And so Gamaliel was right. He was absolutely right. If this is of men, it will die out. And if it's of God, we can't stop it. And now 2,000 years later, it has yet to be stopped. So let's not be being a part of those who would bring it to a halt. Let's be those who keep it moving forward just as they did. So thanks a lot. Hopefully this is going to be really helpful to you this week, to really challenge you and your group to discuss. These are great sections of Scripture that continually remind us of what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ. What is the cost? What is the sacrifice? And what is the fruit? As a result, we are all the fruit in one sense or another. So hope you have a great evening, and we'll be back with you the next time. Thanks.